let us proceed. Welcome everyone,
Oh,
Ellen Imaginary, to New Moon Stories 7. This is our seventh edition, and it's the program is part of the Storyteller in Residence program by the Cape Breton Regional Library. I am the current storyteller in residence, a third in a long line of three, and we've been doing this at the New Moon for 7 months now. And I have guests with us every time. And tonight we are blessed with the presence of, I hope, Ernie McCauley from here in Tarbet and Frank McDonald from way over in Inverness. It occurred to me only after everything was set in stone here that my guests tonight will be Frank and Ernest.
Ha ha ha.
the volume is so low for me. I'm missing. I'm deaf.
Oh,
Doesn't
we
help.
can hear you just. We can hear you just, Frank.
That's all that matters.
Well, we had a little question just a couple of minutes ago before we opened the stories to everyone, and I said to Ernie and Frank, "Who likes to go first?" And Ernie said, "I don't care," and Frank said, "Yes, then it's you." So, Mr. McCauley, Ernie is my neighbor and friend, and we've known each other pretty much since he came back. Ernie is a BFA. He's a back from away. He was born and raised
That's
here
right.
in Cape Breton, went away to the real world, the other world, and came back here, what, 12 or 13 years ago, Ernie?
It's about 13 years now, almost
Yeah,
14. Yeah.
yeah. And we live within walking distance, and we started taking Gaelic lessons together. And over the years,
Yeah.
we managed to learn a lot and forget most of it. So here we are
Yeah.
now. So, Mr. McCauley, would you like to kick things off here? Away you go.
Okay. I just want to make note. It says Jennifer Bevan in the picture where I'm coming through. That's my wife. She changed the name of our computer a while ago for another reason, but that's a whole different story. But I just wanted to tell you how I'm feeling about this. There's an old story about a man who was sent to jail. And when he was in the jail, he was warned that we weren't allowed to speak during meal times. So he's sitting there for the first mealtime. Everything is quiet. And all of a sudden, somebody yells out, 23. And the whole group of the prisoners laugh. So and after that laugh was over, everything became quiet again. And a few minutes later, somebody yells out, 15. And they all laugh again. So he nudges his next door neighbor and says, what's going on? He says, well, we're not allowed to talk. So we've numbered all our stories and jokes. And we just call out a number and everybody knows what it is. So they laugh. He said, okay, I'll try that. So he tries, he yells out 29. No response. Somebody else yells out another number. Everybody laughs. A couple other numbers and everybody laughs. And finally he tries again, 14. Nobody laughs. So he says, what's the matter? And his partner says, some people just don't know how to tell a joke. So that's what I'm feeling like. Am I going to come across okay?
Yeah.
Or is it, I'm just not a good joke teller? Anyway, the first story I wanted to tell you, I lived on the Labrador coast for a while in the 70s on a program to teach children art. Actually, the real reason was they just wanted to keep the kids occupied while the parents went about their job of fishing and gathering berries and so on. So I spent the whole summer there. And while I was there, I met an elderly gentleman who was suffering from health problems. He had diabetes and heart disease and so on, and he couldn't drive anymore. So we became friends, and I became his chauffeur on the weekends to go to the grocery store to get his food, which was about 23 miles away. And on the way, there was a hillside, kind of like Smoky, that kind of steepness, but only a short distance. So we went into town, we got the groceries, and we're coming back. And it started to turn foggy before we left the grocery store. And as you know, in these coastal communities, the fogs can roll in really quickly and blanket things. So as we came to this hillside, we were going down the hill. And I made a comment, John, it's awfully foggy tonight, isn't it? And he says, my son, that's what it's like betimes. He says, betimes here the fog is so thick, I have to turn the headlights off because it pushes against the fog and won't let the truck go down the hill. I had to take a great big knife and get out of the truck and cut a hole in the fog so I could get through. That's my story.
Good one. Good one, Ernie. Thank you. Well, Frank McDonald is probably well known to a lot of people, especially in Inverness. He's written for the Oran for 100 years. Frank, have you ever lived away from Cape Breton?
The which?
Have you lived away from Cape Breton, or have you always been here?
Oh, I've done the mandatory 10 years. Ontario, Alberta, Boston, we all have to serve that sentence.
Yes.
I got back. Some are still stranded out there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've
held hostage
never-
by grandkids and stuff like that.
Hmm. I've met Cape Bretoners all over the country, and I'd never met a one that didn't want to go home at some point.
Yeah.
Frank is, besides being a journalist, he's also an author and the writer of what I think the Cape Breton classic, the A Forest for Column. Wonderful, wonderful book. I read it and I bought it and given it away to friends too. And Frank, thank you for being here. I know you're more comfortable with written word and not that comfortable with technology. So I appreciate you
Well,
jumping in the deep end with us.
Technology is the, yeah. Well, I got to just, well, just a short one that I'm just reminded of a while ago, because I heard this a long time ago. It was an interview with Archie Neil Chisholm, who was a cultural guru in Western Cape Breton. And he was being interviewed on CBC. And the woman who was interviewing him asked Archie Neil, who's the best fiddler in Cape Breton Island? And Archie Neil said, listen, dear, I'd sooner swallow a keg of dynamite and chase it down with a lit fuse than answer that question on Cape Breton Island. He said, he said, one time in the early 1950s, they had a fiddling contest in Cape Breton. It was over in the Sydney area. I don't remember who won it, but what everybody found out was they didn't like it. And so you can have a favorite fiddler, but you dare not say who was the best without getting yourself into a fit. But that's just a preamble to an unrelated story. The reminded of this because although today was the most beautiful day we've experienced since last July, I think, we just went through a terrible cold snap in which my wife's studio, everything froze up, pipes busted, the hot water tank. It was a horrific patching up job that went on by other people whom I admire greatly. And but in the early days of Inverness, and it's going back into the 20s and 30s, the town had a water commissioner. His name was Duncan Elliott McIsaac. And he was Lewis, old Lewis McIsaac. And in the winter, water shortages would happen much like they would with a drought in the summer, because the reservoir that provided the water would freeze to a depth where they were trying to conserve the water and telling people don't use any more water than you have to. And most of the houses, particularly the company houses built by the mining company, they had running water, but they had no sewer system, no ditching system. So the sink pipe just ran out the outside wall of the kitchen, and the water just ran into the yard. Well, in the wintertime, people couldn't keep the water from freezing, their only option was to keep it running, let it run all night long so that it wouldn't freeze. Well, old Lewis would go around at night with a bag of potatoes, and he'd go through those yards, and anywhere he saw water running out of a pipe, he would take a potato and he'd slam it onto the pipe. And people would wake up in the morning to their own arena because that would just back up and overflow and freeze on the floor. And so we didn't need to do that, but that was just it was a story I'd been told and was reminded of while we were fixing the damage from a big freeze up as well. And who's next?
Yeah.
I guess it's back over to me.
Okay.
I don't know if I just sent something or not. And I appreciate you being here because public speaking is not everybody's comfort zone for sure. Um, and again, like Frank, our guest last month, Mike Hunter, is also a writer, and he was not comfortable or familiar with oral tradition. So he took the time and trouble to memorize one of his stories and deliver it as a spoken word story, and that was really swell. There's a fellow in Bedeck that I invited to join us because I know him. I've known him for a long time, and he's a wonderful storyteller. You can't go in and say hi, David, because you'll be there for 15 minutes hearing the latest news and gossip. So I asked him, "Would you like to join us on this?" No, no, no. He said, "Oh God, I can't do public speaking." He said, I was a best man at a wedding a few years ago, he said, and I had to give a speech. I was sick for a month before and 3 weeks after. It's not comfortable for a lot of people, and I appreciate you and everyone else who jumped in to help out with this, to, get out and tell your stories. I'm also issuing the invitation to anybody in the audience. If you'd like to jump in with a story, you just get the chat on the bottom of your screen and tell Tara, and we will come and open the gate for you. I'm quite pleased tonight to have someone who's already volunteered. Marina, do you think you're ready to enter the pool here?
Yeah, she said she's getting, she can probably swing that. So what I can do is just see if I can open, let's find Marina here. You might be
I
able to
can see her, but I think you may
Amita
have to
unmute.
unmute yourself.
Okay, let's see what I can do here.
Here we go.
Oh, yay.
Well, firstly, I didn't volunteer. Bill recruited me. And
Yeah.
I'm okay. Should I introduce the story?
Sure.
Okay, so this is
Your
a story
screen, babe.
this is a story that I learned at the Gaelic College. I'm not telling it in Gaelic because I don't know how. So I just had a recording of it, and I just took the English that was being translated from it and just wrote it down. But I don't have that with me, so I'm just going to tell it. Once there was a young man who was homeless, and so he had to go to a different person's house pretty much every night to find a place to stay. So he found this house, and he went up and he knocked on the door, and this old woman opened the door, and she asked him, "Who are you?" And he said, "My name is William, sit down." And she went, "William, sit down." And he took that to mean that she wanted him to sit down. So we went, "Oh, thank you." And he went into her house and he sat down. And when they were both in the house, she asked him if he wanted something to eat. And so he said, "I would like some porridge if it wouldn't be too much of a trouble." And so she went and she made him up some porridge, and she brought it to him, and he took it. And then she went back into the kitchen for some reason. I don't know why, but he then pulled out a water bottle from his pocket, and he poured the water into the porridge to make it thin. And the woman came back from the kitchen, and he handed her back the bowl, and he said, "Could you please make me some more porridge? This one's too thin." So she took the porridge and she went back to the kitchen and made up some more. At this time, she used a very large bowl with a very substantial amount of porridge in it. And she took it back to him, and he took it and he ate it all up. And this woman was kind of on the fence about this guy with his strange name and all. So she asked him again, "What is your name, young man?" And he says, "My name is, have you ever seen the likes of me?" So she goes, "Have you ever seen the likes of me? Well, that's a very strange name." Then she takes the bowl and she goes back into the kitchen with the bowl to wash it up. And the boy takes out a bag from his pocket of wonders and he goes into the old woman's pantry and he starts stealing her food. And he goes to go out the door and run away, and the woman sees him and she goes after him and she tells him to stop, but he doesn't listen, and he runs down to the road and the woman chases after him, and she's calling what she thinks is his name after him. She's going, "Have you ever seen the likes of me? Have you ever seen the likes of me?" And everyone in the town thinks she's crazy. The end.
Uh,
Yeah, I
Top
think
alive, Mograi.
Holding up.
Nice, Gail. Nah, that was a good story. Thank you very much, Marina.
oh, you're welcome.
I think we've extended the age brackets in this program here. I think, Marina, you're the youngest probably. Are you 13? Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And Ernie is even older than me. And we'll just leave that there, eh? Good.
Oh, Ernie wants to stay.
Well, I have a little story here. I have some friends who farmed in Middle River. This is years ago. They were a young family then. They had a 4-year-old and a new baby. They were out in the barn one day and they heard this little squeaky kind of a sound. It sounded like a very young kitten mewing. And they chased it down and it was a baby squirrel up in the rafters. And they figured that the barn cats had probably dismashed the mother and the little baby was an orphan. So they took it in the house, and the next thing was what to feed this. They knew if they fed it cow's milk, it would kill it. So they phoned the vet and said, "We got this squirrel. What can we feed it?" And he said, "Well, there is a formula. It'll take me about 2 weeks to get it." Of course, that would have been well after the funeral. So with nothing to lose, they improvised and discovered that a baby squirrel does very well indeed on a diet of human breast milk. And the squirrel thrived. It became a family pet. The 4-year-old named it Patsy. They found out later that Patsy was a boy squirrel, not a girl squirrel, but nobody cared enough to go through the paperwork to change it. So Patsy was a pet. And pet or not, is still a wild animal. And when a wild animal gets a call from nature, they answer it wherever they happen to be. Yeah. So the squirrel would get a call from nature and it would stop and squat and squirt, and someone would get a paper towel or a cloth and clean it up, and that's all there was to that. And Patsy loved everybody, but he absolutely bonded with Daddy. Daddy was his favorite. As soon as Daddy came in from outside, Patsy would be up his leg and over his shoulders and crawling all around, just couldn't get close enough. And the routine for Daddy on a normal day was to come in in midday and have his lunch and a little visit, and then he would stretch out in the mudroom for 20 minutes or half an hour for a little nap. This was Patsy's favorite time of the day. Loved it. So as soon as Daddy lay down, Patsy was over his pant legs and his shirt and crawling over his head and just trying to find the perfect place to curl up, And at one point when he was passing over Daddy's head, he got a call from nature. So he stopped, squatted, and urinated in Daddy's ear. Daddy found this uncomfortable. He jumped and roared. The squirrel went flying. Mom, who was washing dishes at the time, dropped a handful of silverware in the sink. That got the dog barking, and the baby started to cry, and it was pandemonium for a few minutes there. And they got calmed down and flushed Daddy's ear as best they could and went at it with 6 or 7 or 8 Q-tips to make sure everything got out. And that was the story until bedtime. When Daddy went to bed, Mom was asleep, of course, grabbing whatever hours of shut-eye she could. And he was thinking just before he drifted off, he said, "You know what? Patsy's a pet, but still a rodent, and a rodent is vermin, and vermin are notorious carriers of disease." He said, "I hope I don't get an ear infection. That's the last thing I need right now." And that ear infection, that rang a little bell for him because a couple of months ago, the dog had had an ear infection. So they got something from the vet for it and an antibiotic. And Daddy thought, well, an ear is an ear and it's probably the same drug. So why not be cautious? And so he went and got the tube and applied it to his ear and went to sleep. Mom was coming back from one of her starlight feedings and she looked at her husband and thought something looked odd. And she looked closer and his ear was swollen up the size of half a grapefruit. And she touched it and it was hot. And as soon as she touched it, he jumped up and was awake. And they went and looked at it and she said, "What happened?" So he told her about putting the stuff in his ear and she said, "Oh, don't think it's working. We better get it out of there." Now, the ear formation of a dog and a human are pretty much the same, but their reaction to something in the ear is different. A human, if you put something in his ear to help medically, they know it and they leave it alone. A dog, on the other hand, will do anything he or she can to get the offending stuff out of there. They'll scratch and they'll shake their heads like crazy. And the veterinarians know this. So when they compounded the antibiotic, it was applied as a paste and dried to the consistency of wood putty or concrete. And they could not get the plug out. They were stuck. And so Daddy was awake and in pain with nothing to do except wait for the doctor's office to open in the morning. So he did. He went into Bedeck, and the doctor was a laconic fellow. He didn't show much in the way of emotion. If you got a smile out of him, it was like a belly laugh from anybody else. And he looked at the ear and said, "What happened?" So he told him about the dog's prescription, and he got a raised eyebrow for that. And that was all. So the doctor got his removal tools and dug the plug out and swabbed it with antiseptic, and then he sat down and wrote a prescription, and then something else. He wrote something else on the prescription pad and gave them both to Dad. What, my ear's itchy all of a sudden. And so he took him down to the drugstore, gave him to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist said, "Well, I can give you this one. We can make this up, but the other one, we don't have that. You can buy it online or you can get it from the vet." He looked at it. Dog scratch collar. End of story. Okay. I believe, Ernie, we've come full circle here.
Okay,
You got something else up your sleeve?
sure. One little thing I wanted to do is just say hello to Ron. Hello, Ron Kaplan. It's been a while since I've said hello to you. Nice to see you
Hello,
again.
Ron Kaplan. Hi, Sharon.
I want to fill in just a little bit of some history about South Haven and surrounds, and also to fill in a little history of me so people understand where I'm coming from. I was born in Glace Bay because my dad was a miner and he was working in the mines there. But after 7 years of being there, he saw the handwriting on the wall, seeing people getting black lung disease. So he quit and he managed to get a job in Halifax in the dockyard. And that's where we moved to. But every summer, they would send my brother and I back up to St. Anne's. So I spent a great deal of my early life in and around South Haven and North Gut. Our farm was in North Gut. John McLeod was on one side of us, and Norman Ross's farm was on the other side. We were in between. And that's where I spent a lot of my summers with my brothers and cousins, because my father was one of 14 siblings. My grandmother had 14 children. 9 of them stayed in this area and produced families. And a couple of them even produced big families, like 10 and 12 children. So I've got cousins ranging back and forth from Bedeck to South Haven. Some of the other siblings went out west and some went to the United States. So every summer I would come home and to Cape Breton and get into kind of mischief from time to time with Robert A. McLeod and Nicky McLeod and myself and my brother Malcolm. We were always up to crazy nonsense doing something. My aunt, my aunt Toddy was my dad's sister, and I used to spend some time there. And my cousin Robert, myself, and my brother had a little chemistry set, and we decided to fool around with that and try to get something experimental going. And we don't even know, I don't remember now the stuff we put in there, but I do remember there was a little bit of kerosene went into it, and it wasn't working. So for whatever the reason, one of us, I think it was probably me, it might have been my brother, decided to get rid of it and threw it in the stove. And it blew up, of course, immediately. And it was one of those old stoves, that you had circular uh, openings where you could lift it up and put the wood in. It blew one of those right out of the stove, turned it upside down, and embedded it in the ceiling. So that was one of the little things that we got in trouble with from time to time, that kind of nonsense. But what I really wanted to do is just paint a little bit of picture of South Haven. You know where the Ephraim Scott Memorial Church is, and there's a road that goes down beside that. We called that the shortcut or the North Gut Road because it went all the way across and come out below where the college is now. It's all overgrown now, so you can't take that road anymore. But along that road, there were people that were friends and family. When you went down that road and crossed a little bridge, up on the right was Johnny Morrison. He had two daughters, and they were also competitors in Highland dancing, as I was. They were also relatives of ours. Over to the left was Alec Matson. Alec Matson had a forge down near the church. That's gone now, but Alec lived up on that hill. Then there was my Aunt Catherine, or known as Toddy. She lived, what the road was that goes, the dirt road that goes by the church, sort of a little loop road and comes back up onto the highway. Hers was the last house if you're coming from the church. That was my Aunt Toddy's house. And then there was another gentleman known as Neely John C. McLeod. Now, he was an interesting man. He was one of three boys. Their father wanted to have a lawyer, a doctor, and a minister in the family. And he was a pretty stern old bugger, so he did manage to get all of them to go into university and take those courses. But Neely John did not want to do that. He wanted to stay home and farm. So he went to university, he got his diploma, he got his degree, and he came back home. He gave the diploma or the degree to his father and said, "Here, you're the one that wanted this. You can take it and do what you want, but I'm going to stay on the farm." And he lived there for the rest of his life. An interesting thing about Neely John C. was he kept a diary. I wish I could find that to get a look at it now. Every day of his life, he entered stuff in that diary, which had information about South Haven, the weather, the temperatures, and so on. And Robert and I used to help him sometimes with the haying in the summertime. Who else did I want to mention? There was an old gentleman called Norman Black who used to wander the roads up and down with a whistle. And when he wanted you to get your attention to allow him to come into the house, he'd stand outside the house and blow his whistle. And if you were willing to take him in, he was just kind of a simple man, but he was well liked in the community. Everybody always gave him a helping hand. So that's, oh yes, the corner, where the lobster galley is now. That piece of property was owned by Murdoch D. McLeod, and he had a little grocery store there, just a small store. And eventually he sold that to Leonard Jones. Leonard was the CEO of the Gaelic College for a number of years. So when Leonard bought it, he transformed that into, he had a garage, gas pumps, and a grocery store, and he had some cabins, which was later turned into the motel you see there now. And eventually then he sold it to Jack and Jean, who own it now as the Lobster Galley. So that's just a little bit of the history of what St. Anne's was like, what South Haven was like back then.
Good, you're good. I offended the folks at the Lobster Galley when I wrote a story called The Iceberg Galley about the pack ice breaking up and coming through the window. That was in a. Now, was that one of your collections, Ron? It was. It wasn't. It was, yes, The Men's Breakfast. Yeah, one of Ron Kaplan's anthologies. So, yeah, I managed to offend some people. Good for me. Thank you, Tara. While we were gone, I had the cough, so I muted myself, which I can do, and then I couldn't unmute myself, so I had to chat with Tara to get her to turn me back on again. I
Yeah.
hope you don't regret that too much. Yeah. Well, Frank, looks like we've come around again.
Oh, I think I have to unmute Frank now.
I think you have to unmute Frank too, yeah.
Sorry, Frank. It's not doing anything. Hold on.
Is anybody hearing me?
There we are.
There you are
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
All
Sorry
right.
there. Sorry.
All right. Okay, I just wanted to ask about the journal that was just spoken
Mr. Ernie,
about,
sure.
Right.
the uncle's journal. Is that anywhere accessible, or has Ron Kaplan published it? But you know, it sounds like a really incredible document, and I hope that it's still around.
Where did Ernie go?
I'm trying to unmute Ernie too.
Okay, is that better now?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
There you
Okay.
are.
Yeah, my mic seems to go on and off here. I almost lost you for a moment there as well.
Did you hear me?
Okay,
Did you hear
Bernie?
Frank's question?
no, I didn't hear.
Okay, Bernie, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Yeah, I was just asking about that journal you spoke about.
Yes.
Is that still around? Is it someone have it? Is it?
I think it passed on to his, his family, but I have no idea where it is, where it's gone, and I don't know who to get a hold of to see if it can be traced down.
Yeah, it'd be a remarkable document.
Oh, it would.
I committed a mortal sin myself one time, Bernie, because my great grandfather went to New Zealand on the last McLeod boat, and he it's a surprise to us because he was a Catholic, and Jim Sinclair thinks probably as the ship's carpenter or something like that. But he kept a journal all the way over, and he returned a year later. He wrote in the journal he was leaving New Zealand to save his soul. He kept documents of costs. He wrote songs and poems in it. And when it came to my mother, and when my mother passed away, my father hung on to it and gave it to me when I was 16. And I never took it out of the house, but it vanished altogether. But it was a tremendous document. And there's so many of those things that have disappeared. When I hear something like that, I just think those are the stories that we want to be telling or want to be hearing.
Yeah.
Whatever is there. But anyway, I'll shut up now.
Yeah, well, there's one small connection. A young McLeod lady who lived with Neely John C. for a while. She was the daughter of somebody that was kind of his girlfriend. She moved out west, and if I can get a hold of somebody in the area who may know where she is, I might be able to trace it down from there. But I have bad feelings that we'll never be able to find it.
Yeah, it's just those documents are so valuable in retrospect now. And but what happens next?
When my father's eyesight went and he couldn't do it anymore, he kept a diary all his life every day. And he gave me 25 years of his diaries. And I've gone through them somewhat. And if you want to know the temperature, wind velocity, and humidity for any day in the 25 years between 1985 and 2010, I have it. He wrote one entry on February the 9th, 2005, and I think he said it was -9 degrees, light winds, whatever the humidex was. Called the boys at 8 o'clock. called somebody else at noon, and that was about the whole entry. And that was the day my mother died.
Uh,
So I have been deliberately keeping a diary for some time now, and trying to be not a history of the weather forecast, but things that matter
yes,
to me, the way that I think and feel, and things that I experience. Yeah.
yeah.
So, and maybe nobody will want to read it, but if they do, it's right here.
Well, Neely John also kept stories of just about the people and events that took place in South Haven and the surrounds. So it would really be quite a nice diary to get a hold of if we ever could. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And as Frank said, maybe Mr. Kaplan will publish it.
Yeah.
I sort of lost track where we are and whose turn it is, but have you ever been asked what one book would you take to the desert island with you? My answer would be Fables for Our Time by James Thurber. It was published in 1939, and it's a series of parables with a twist on them, and everyone has a moral. And it's
Uh-huh.
the reason we tell stories, I think, is to pass on information. And this is one of the stories that I quite like. It's called The Bear Who Let It Alone. In the great woods of the far west, there lived a brown bear who could take it or leave it alone. He'd go into a bar where they sold mead, a fermented drink made from honey, and he would have just 2 drinks. Then he'd say, "See what the bears in the back room will have," and put some money on the counter and leave. After a time, the bear took to drinking by himself most of the day, and he would reel home at night, kicking over the umbrella stand, knocking down the bridge lamps, and ramming his elbows through the windows. Then he would lie down on the floor and fall asleep. His wife was greatly distressed, and his children were very frightened. At length, the bear saw the error of his ways and began to reform. In the end, he became a famous teetotaler and a persistent temperance lecturer. He would preach to everyone to come into his house about the awful effects of drink, and he'd boast about how strong and well he'd become since he gave up touching the stuff. To demonstrate this, he would stand on his head and stand on his hands and turn cartwheels in the living room, kicking over the umbrella stand, knocking down the bridge lamps, and ramming his elbows through the windows. Then, tired from his healthful exercise, he'd lie down on the floor and go to sleep. His wife was greatly distressed, and his children were very frightened. And the moral of the story is, you might as well fall flat on your face as lean over too far backwards. And I remembered where we left off. We asked Frank for a story, and we went off on a tangent. The way that happens in these
Now
things,
let's
which
see.
is lovely.
Yes. So I have a family story to tell that touches on religion. So I hope this is all right. But my grandfather worked on the railroad, and he spent a lot of time in working for CN in northern New Brunswick and northern Quebec, and he would only get home every few months for a block of time. But he also lived by a schedule, and he had a thing that even I remember as a child, long after he was retired. The storm windows went up on October 15th. They came down on May 15th. The weather had nothing to do with this. And it was the same with his sun porch. It opened on May 15th. It closed with a skeleton key on October 15th. So one year he was gone for an extended amount of time. He never got back to Inverness until December 8th. And when he got home, he noticed right away, very early in the morning, that the storm windows weren't up. So he went into the shed and he brought out the storm windows and he got them cleaned up. And then he went into the house, and my Uncle Charlie was just coming through the kitchen. And Jack D, my grandfather, said, "Charlie, I want a hand with these storm windows. Sorry, Pa, I have to go to Mass. Jack D, by the way, was Presbyterian. He raised a Catholic family, but that's a whole other story. So, and so this was on a Tuesday. So the next person to come through the kitchen was my father. Freddie, I want a hand with these storm windows. Sorry, Pa, I have to go to Mass. The next person to come was Annie Bell, my grandmother, putting on her coat and had her purse, and he said, "Where are you going?" And she said, "I have to go to Mass." He said, "Why is everybody going to Mass on a Tuesday?" And she said, "Well, it's the feast of the Immaculate Conception." And he said, "The Immaculate, what's that?" And she said, "It's the feast of the Mother of God." And he said, "Mother of God, my foot." She was no better than my own mother. And my grandmother, as she was going out the door, said, "Maybe not, Jackie, but there's an awful difference in the sons." Anyway, that is
Can I tell a story, a bear story?
of what?
A bear story.
A bear
Story about bears,
Yes.
because Bill brought up a bear story. I lived in Washington State for 2 years with a medicine man by the name of Sun Bear, and he loved bear stories. Part of that reason that I was there was my grandmother on my mother's side confessed not long before she passed away that we had Mi'kmaq ancestry, and that made me search out some of that, and I ended up for 2 years living with Sun Bear and learning the traditional
Back
ways.
to it. There. Okay, I got booted off, and I think I'm back now. Am I?
Yeah, we can hear
Yeah,
you.
we hear you.
Okay, good. Good. I'm a customer of Seaside Dry Speed over here. They have broadcast equipment that doesn't seem to work when it rains, and we live in Cape Breton, so sometimes we have some failures, and I just had one. So, Frank, I missed the punchline. I hope I get it on the recording.
And Ernie, it
And-
started a story, so you missed the beginning of his story too. Ernie's in the middle of
Okay.
one. Maybe do you want to start
I
again?
can. Yeah, I'll start again.
Okay.
I think Bill knows this. I spent 2 years with a medicine man in Washington State, a man by the name of Sun Bear, because it turns out from on my mother's side there was indication of ancestry, Mi'kmaq ancestry. My grandmother confessed to me just before she died. She showed me a picture of a native woman, and of course at that time those things weren't talked about much. Anyway, it piqued my interest, and I started searching out the history and the traditional ways of the native people. So I spent 2 years with a spiritual medicine man. Anyway, his name was Sun Bear, and he loved bear stories. So one of the bear stories is a man is walking in the woods, and he happens to be an atheist. And he's walking along and looking at all these plants and animals and making comment about these accidental things that happened that brought these forth, and sort of living down the very naturalness of the forest and so on. And as he's walking along, he heard sound behind him, and he turned around. There was a bear just barreling down the path towards him. So he took off running, and he didn't notice there was a root sticking up a little ahead of him, and he tripped over that root and fell down onto the path. And when he turned around, the bear was above him with his paw way up like this and just about ready to hit him, when all of a sudden everything went still. The clouds stopped moving, the leaves stopped whistling, the movement of the grasses stopped. It was total silence. And all of a sudden he heard a voice. He said, "Who do you think you are? Putting down all my creations and calling them just acts of nature. You should be ashamed of yourself. Don't you do that again." And the man very apologetically said, I'm sorry, sir." And at that point, everything cleared up. Everything started moving again. And the bear was in this position, went to this position and said, "Thank you, Lord, for the food we're about to receive."
Oh, Randy, you're such a. People say you're a terrible liar, but you're not. You're really a very good liar. Yes, thank you. This the Storyteller in Residence program is belongs to the Cape Breton Regional Library. And Tara, would you like to do a little library commercial now and tell us what else you offer?
Yes, I would like to do a little commercial if you can just give me a minute of your time. I thought I'd mention a few things. But the first thing I wanted to say was I know we're on New Moon Story 7, and I have yet to share a story with you. I think I'm waiting for the Blue Moon story. That's when I'll share my story with you. How's that? Blue Moon stories. But I just wanted to share that the library, of course, with COVID, has had to expand a lot of the offerings we have, and so online has expanded a bit. The programs that you can find online, and events like New Moon Stories um, are happening, and then they're getting posted, so you can watch 1 to 6 in New Moon Stories. It's been posted on our YouTube channel, and the link's been shared. Another great program I thought I'd share, and I especially so because 3 of the cast are in the audience. Last Sunday, there was a Dead Feminist fundraiser that staff at the Bedeck Library and the Bedeck players put on. And it was a wonderful production, and we were able to do it in person, which was really lovely. It was one of the things I've been to after a long time of not being able to be out in the public. But they video recorded it, and you can find that online as well. It is a fundraiser, however, so there is a small donation to be made, and then the link gets shared with you. But it was a wonderful production. You got a real first-hand account of some very famous and wonderful dead feminists. But if you'd like to see that, it's online. And if you check us out on our webpage or check on Facebook, I think you'll find lots of nice postings, interesting little programs, fun puppet shows. There's a John and Leon puppet series that's been added, and a gentle exercise series that we've added. So things are happening. They're just different than we're used to. And I think if you checked online, you'd find some great offerings from the library. And the last thing I'll mention is I don't know if any of you are on March break, maybe Marina. But a lot of our libraries do have some activities for children next week, and a lot of them are crafts to go and science takeaway kits. But if you have anyone in your house or in your neighborhood who's kind of under 12 and a little bored next week, I think they'd find some things to do at their library if you made your way there. So I think I'll end it there. There's always a lot more to say, but I'm having a lovely evening tonight. So thank you all, the storytellers. Maybe the one last thing I can share is I feel like we've had some trouble with our muting and unmuting, and I'm not sure if maybe that's a way I set up the Zoom. But if you do find that you've fallen out of touch with us or you can't say anything, you can always share comments on that chat box. So if you just scrolled your mouse over the bottom of your screen and click on the chat, you'd be able to share a message like, help, I can't talk, or I'd like to share a story. So please feel free to comment there if you've lost control to do so with your mute. So that's the end. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Tara. So when we do this at a blue moon, you're in.
I'm hoping there's none in the calendar.
I was on the library site and I found a new program called The Lone Poet that Molly Bevan is doing, and she's inviting people to record their poetry and send a video to her, and you can find that on crl.ca.
Thank you.
The other thing I'll mention is that the Dead Feminists presentation, Marina, who told us her story before, was an actor in that. Yeah, so good on you, my dear. Well, if there's anyone else from the Peanut Gallery, this might be the first time we don't have someone from the tag team of Spencer Macaulay, but we'll see. And I've also invited Rob, who he enjoyed the cycling story that Kathy and Art told last time, and he is also a cyclist. So I'll just dangle the bait in front of him and see if he bites. But not just yet.
Not yet.
Okay. Now I think we might be back to Mr. McDonald, are we? By golly, I declare we're back at Frank McDonald.
All right, I'm going to unmute to see if that helps.
Okay.
Oh,
Uh,
are
this
you there,
is-
Frank?
I'm on.
Okay.
You're on.
Okay. I'm scrambling a bit here, but we haven't had outside of your piece from Ferber, a good drinking story, and so
Ah.
I am. I'm just reminded of a story a friend told me about his uncle who had been on a tremendous binge, and he had been drinking for a few weeks, and finally, my friend's father had had enough of his brother's drinking, and asked my friend to help him carry the uncle into the car and drove him up to the glebe house to see the priest. Now, in those days, pre AA or maybe even during AA, taking a pledge from the priest was the surest way to get sober. You could your hand on the Bible and swear that from now till Easter you will not have a drink, or I will, So, or you could take the pledge for 6 months, or you could take the pledge for a year. And most people thought their souls were at stake, or they believed their souls were at stake. So it worked as a sobering device. And so the the brother and nephew carried the uncle in, or guided him in to see the priest, who the parish priest here at the time was Father Archie. And Father Archie was more than happy to take the pledge from him. And so he asked him,
Yeah.
well, Angus, how long do you want? He had the Bible in his hand. That's part of the pledge. You put your hand in the Bible. He said, how long do you want to take the pledge for? Well, Father, I usually take it for life. That's it, gentlemen.
My father showed me once. He signed the pledge when he was
Uh-huh.
10 years old. Yeah, and I think it was for life as well. Yeah, yeah. And he never was much of a drinker. I remember on Saturdays, my mom and dad used to have their what they called a screwdriver, and it was ginger ale and orange juice, and that was their
Uh-huh.
celebration. That was their wild Saturday night. Hmm. Oh, Frank, you mentioned that one about getting the windows up according to the calendar.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing years ago when drive-ins were very popular. There was a couple had been to the drive-in on Saturday, and they were complaining the next day. We were at the drive-in last night. It was freezing cold. Goodness, we could hardly stay in the car. And they said, "Well, did you turn on the heater?" Well, no, it's only September. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, this is a piece that I have always admired, but is never part of my repertoire until Frank McDonald said, "Okay, I'll do New Moon stories with you." And then
I'll
I
do the
thought,
what?
this is something that Frank
Oh,
would like, so it's going to be worth the time and effort to do it. I have spent many, many hours, Frank, learning this, going through the woods, collecting my maple syrup, reciting this thing over and over. I'm sure there's about 15 maple trees out in the forest that know at least part of the verse. And it's a rhyming poem, and it was written by a man named Ernest Lawrence Thayer. First published in the San Francisco Examiner on June 3rd, 1888. And it was later popularized by a vaudevillian named DeWolf Hopper. And he said that he figured over the course of his career he had recited this piece more than 10,000 times. And this will be not my first time reciting it, but the first time out of the woods doing it live in front of people. So here we are. And the proper title is Casey at the Bat, a Ballad of the Republic, sung in the year 1888. The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville Nine that day. The score stood 4-2 with but one inning more to play. And then when Cooney died at first and Barrows did the same, a pall of silence fell upon the patrons of the game. A straggling few got up to leave in deep despair. The rest clung to the hope that springs eternal in the human breast. They thought, if only Casey could but get a whack at that, we'd put up even money now with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, as did also Jimmy Blake, and the former was a hoodoo and the latter was a cake. Upon that stricken multitude grim melancholy sat, for there seemed but little chance of Casey getting to the bat. But Flynn let drive a single to the wonderment of all, and Blake, the much despised, tore the cover off the ball. And when the dust had lifted and men saw what had occurred, there was Jimmy safe at second and Flynn hugging third. From 5,000 throats there rose a lusty yell. It rumbled in the valley, it rattled in the dell, it sounded on the mountains and recoiled upon the flat. For Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place. There was pride in Casey's bearing, and a smile lit Casey's face. And when, responding to the crowd, he lightly doffed his hat, no stranger in the crowd could doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded as he wiped them on his shirt. Then, when the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance flashed in Casey's eyes. A sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather-covered sphere comes hurtling through the air, and Casey stands a-watching it in haughty grandeur there. Close by the sturdy batsman as the ball unheeded sped. That ain't my style, said Casey. Strike one, the umpire said. From the benches black with people there rose a muffled roar like the beating of the storm waves on a stern and distant shore. Come, kill the umpire, someone shouted on the stand. And it's like they'd have killed him, not Casey raised his hand. A smile of Christian charity on Casey's visage shone. He stilled the rising tumult. He bade the game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and once again the dun sphere flew, but Casey still ignored it. The umpire said, strike two! Fraud! Cried the maddened thousands, and the echo answered, fraud! One scornful look from Casey and the audience was awed. They saw his face grow stern and cold. They saw his muscles strain, and they knew that Casey would not let that ball go by again. The sneer is on his lips. His teeth are clenched in hate. He pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate. And now the pitcher has the ball. And now he lets it go. And now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Somewhere in this favored land the sun is shining bright. A band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light, and somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill.
And thank you, Rosemary, for the props there. I cut out a picture of a microphone and she pasted it. Oh my goodness. Oh dear. Omission. Oh, that's what I forgot.
Ah.
Oh,
Hmm. Well, I'm glad that's over with. I bet you the maple trees are glad of it too. Hmm. Do you have something else in the
They'll all
bag
grow
there,
up to be
Randy?
baseball bats.
The reason I know that Frank would like that is that he wrote a piece about baseball, and he said in when he posted it that he was sad that no musicians had gotten to putting music to it. So I took that upon myself, and I did, and I had to change the words a bit. But anyway, that was the clue that Frank might enjoy baseball.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure indeed. Anybody raising their hand there, Tara?
No, there's no one in the chat box.
My goodness. Well, that's rare.
I've got one.
There we go.
All right,
I've got
good
a-
man.
I've got a little religious story to tell you. One day up in heaven, Jesus come up to Peter and said, Pete, you've never been on a vacation. It's time you took a day off. I'll look after the gate. So Peter says, Jesus, can you do that? He said, of course, there's nothing to it. I'll just sit here and wait for people to come in. I'll interview them when they come in. So reluctantly, St. Peter leaves and Jesus sits down at the desk and he's smoothing out the book and playing with the feathers to write in the big book for anybody coming. And he's waiting a long time until finally a little old man come up to the gate. And so Jesus looked out at him and said, okay, why do you think you should be able to come into this place? And he said, well, you know, sir, it's not because of me, it's because of my son. He said, well, tell me about your son. He said, well, he wasn't born in the flesh. Thousands of people the world over loved him. And he was made to be well loved everywhere. At which point Jesus looked down and said, Father? And the old man said, Pinocchio?
Bill,
Well, Ernie,
oh, sorry, Bill.
that's okay.
You do have two storytellers now. So if there's
Oh,
time,
good.
Ronald and Kathy and Art said they both had something to share. So
All right.
if you
Well,
want,
let's ask Ronald first, and then we'll bring up the tag team
okay.
to close things off. That'd be great.
I'm gonna unmute.
Ronald Bell was the second storyteller in residence for Cape Breton Library. He did it for 4 years, following Ken Chisholm, and left me his moccasins, which I've been doing my best to carry on with. So.
Hmm.
Good.
Hey,
Ronald, are you there?
can you hear me out there?
Yep.
I can hear
Yeah.
you.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, when you listen to some stories, it always reminds you of another story. And when I joined this meeting, not meeting, this storytelling session, shortly after, I heard about some old diaries, lost, precious diaries, and that reminded me of the diary that was in my family, in my father's family, for generations and generations, passed down. And when my father was a kid, he said that his favorite storybook, was getting his parents to read a passage from the family diary that had been existed since at least the 1830s, if not earlier. And eventually, it was my great uncle was the last person who had this diary. And I suspect that he was a priest. He was a cantankerous old priest who, I suspect that there was some stories in there that he thought were not too Catholic. And anyway, the diary disappeared, so I never saw it. But I heard a few of the stories from it. Like my father would talk about the great tornado, the tornado that lifted a barn right off the ground and brought it through the air, and about a farmer who actually found one of his cows, dead, of course, the other side of the river. And the Millid River, which is the north branch of the Ottawa River, it's a wide river. And the cow was brought right over the river. But the most interesting story of all was the 1837 rebellion, where there was one of the major battles was fought in Saint Eustache, just down the road, just about 15 kilometers down the road from where the family lived. And my ancestors, when they heard that the British troops were marching to Saint Eustache, they grabbed their guns and got on their horses, and they went off to fight. Unfortunately, the rebels were outmanned and outgunned by the British, and they ended up getting honed up inside the church, the big stone church in Saint Eustache. And you can still see the pockmarks where the cannonballs hit the stone of the church. But my grandfather said that when the battle ended, they managed to break down the great doors of the church, and the commander of the British forces rode right into the church on his horse. That image of the
Wow.
British commander going right into the church on his horse, that always stuck in my mind when I was little, and listening to my grandfather telling these stories from this wonderful disappeared diary, but it was a true story. And also that this was around December, and one of the guys, one of the ancestors, when they realized that if they stayed in the church, the British were going to burn the place down, they fled, and one of them went out the back of the church, ran down to the river, and ran across on the ice, tried to run across on the ice on the Millet River. But unfortunately, he slipped on the ice and fell, and that's when a British soldier shot him. So the whole thing ended really badly, and we lost the rebellion. And because of that, well, we still have the British royal family to contend with now. So that's stories from our long ago lost family diary. I just wish I had it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that, Ronald. That's lovely.
You're welcome.
So, I'm quite pleased to see Ron Kaplan in the lineup, because I'm sure he has heard more Cape Breton stories than anybody probably still living, and I'm certainly excited to see what he's going to come up with and bless us.
Oh,
Come, Father.
it's Art and Kathy who have another.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry. So I think Art and Kathy
well,
have the story.
Mr. Kaplan, you can consider that an invitation. I had the wrong Ronald there in my brain. I made a bad connection. But okay, we'll go to the tag team of Spencer Macaulay.
I get a kick out of it.
There they are.
I sent a story to Ron that I had heard in Glace Bay, but it wasn't my story. And so basically he followed it up and everything, and he got the story. But unfortunately, he told me it doesn't let me off the hook for the Christmas story this year. I still have to come up with a Christmas story. So it's funny when you talk about the diaries. Art's father kept a diary all his life. And so we have stacks of them up and he too gave a weather forecast every day. And I got a kick out of it, because when you've got like 50 years of diaries, what do you look for? And so anyway, I looked up the day of my husband's birth, and it started with a weather forecast. And then he chatted about the weather, and he chatted about the state of the ice, state of the rain or the plants or something. At the very end, he goes, and a fine son was born to us today. It was an afterthought. So,
well, now I've got something else. I guess going on the theme of, I guess, sports and religion or whatever. That's just a short story. So it was a gentle Cape Breton guy, past middle age, I guess, had a pretty good life. And he's driving down the road, and unbeknownst to him, there's a transfer truck coming around the corner. The next thing he knows is he's seen this bright light. So he starts walking towards the bright light. What's going on here? And through the light, he can see pearly gates. And he says there's somebody standing there, a guardian. So he says, well, I'll make my way up. And then the guardian beckons to him, come on up. And the guy's thinking, uh-oh, is this heaven and I'm dead? how did that happen? But he continues on and stops at the gate. And the guardian greets him and the guy says, "Am I dead?" "Yes, my son, you were killed in an accident. These are the pearly gates. This is heaven." He says, "Oh my God. Well, I guess I'm going to go into heaven." He said, "Yes, sir. Welcome, welcome. But we always ask one question before people get into heaven. Is there anything in your life you can think of that would bar you from entering these gates?" And the fellow thinks, and he says, "You know what? I was a pretty good guy. I had raised a family, had a good job, played some sports and everything. I think I can go in." Then he pauses and he says, "Oh my God, yeah, there is that one thing that haunted me my whole life." So he says, and the guardian says, "You got to be honest about this. So I better fess up." He says, "Well, I went to St. FX and I played varsity hockey. And we were in the finals against St. Mary's. It was the last game, overtime. I'm in front of the St. Mary's net. The puck hits the goalie, comes towards me. I take a swipe at it, miss it with a stick, but I kick it with my skate, and in it goes. Of course, that's an illegal goal. Nobody saw it. I didn't fess up. We won the championship, and I was the hero. And it's kind of haunted me all my life." The guardian looks at him, says, "Well, my son, enter. Come on right in." So he's a little confused. He's walking in, and he looks back. "Well, St. Peter, wasn't that kind of bad enough to bar me, after, all this?" He says, "Ah, no, son, enter, enter. Oh, and by the way, St. Peter's had the day off. I'm St. Francis Xavier."
Good story, well told. Good. Mr. Kaplan, are you likely to take the bait here? Last call? Well,
No messages.
we'll have to come at him differently, perhaps obliquely. Well, I would like to thank my guests tonight, Frank McDonald and Ernie McCauley, for their contributions, and Marina, God love you for doing that, and Ronald and Kathy and Art for jumping in at the end, and Tara, of course, our well, I won't say technical expert,
No.
our host. She has the account.
Poor storyteller. I don't know what to call me. The Blue Moon Story Girl. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll do something. Our next edition will be on Monday, April the 12th, and I have a couple of invitations out, but no confirmations yet. If you have anyone you'd like to suggest, I'm glad to harangue them or tease or coerce in any way I can to get them out here. We'll do at least, hopefully, 2 more before my term ends, and we'll see what happens after that. Any last words from anyone?
I'm
Is
checking.
that your hand, Art?
Yes, no messages. Just claps.
Oh.
Yeah. But yes, applause from the peanut gallery.
Okay, good. Well, thank you one and all, and we'll see you in April, hopefully when there's less snow and less restrictions on us.
Yes, thank you, Bill.
All right, dude. Thanks very much.
Bye, people.
Bye now. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. It was fun.